The Los Diablos cartel thought they'd found an easy target when they set their sights on Michael Reyes' remote Arizona farm. What they didn't know was that Reyes had trained K9 units for SWAT and border tactical operations. Now, as his three German shepherds moved on command, the cartel's raid turned into an ambush. The morning sun casts long shadows across Michael Reyes' 30-acre farm as he steps onto his worn porch, steaming coffee in one hand, his other resting instinctively on Ranger's head. The 8-year-old German shepherd sits perfectly still, his posture military straight, eyes constantly scanning the perimeter with a vigilance that never fades. 30 miles from the Mexican border, this isolated stretch of Arizona farmland seems peaceful, the kind of quiet retirement a 48-year-old ex-cop might dream about after 20 years of service. But appearances can be deceiving. "See something, boy?" Michael asked quietly as Ranger's ears prick forward, focusing on the distant tree line. The dog doesn't bark or whine. He doesn't need to. The subtle shift in muscle tension beneath Michael's fingers communicates everything a trained handler needs to know. Someone is watching. Michael sips his coffee, deliberately casual, his weathered face betraying nothing, as his eyes, still sharp despite the crow's feet, track the slight movement among the mesquite trees half a mile out. Vehicle, dark color, positioned for optimal sight lines to the farmhouse. Third day in the same spot. Michael knows surveillance when he sees it. "Let's check the perimeter," he says, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man who spent 15 years as a police K9 handler, 10 on SWAT, and 3 deployed with a special police training unit in Iraq. Ranger rises without hesitation, joined immediately by 2 more German shepherds who emerge silently from the house. Shadow, 6 years old, former police tactical dog specialized in building clearance, moves like his namesake, dark, fluid, and nearly invisible despite his size. Nova, 5-year-old female with a detection record that made her legendary in the San Diego Police Department, falls into perfect formation on Michael's right flank. The trio of dogs move in disciplined synchronization, not the random pattern of pets enjoying a morning walk, but the coordinated sweep of a tactical unit. Each dog maintains precise spacing, covering specific areas of responsibility without need for verbal commands. They've done this every morning for 2 years, since Michael purchased this land after retiring from the force. To untrained eyes, it might look like a man walking his dogs. To anyone with combat experience, it's clearly a security patrol. "Morning, Reyes!" The call comes from the fence line, where Deputy Sheriff Wilson leans against his patrol car. The young officer tries to maintain a professional demeanor, but Michael notes the way his eyes track the dogs with unconcealed admiration. "Little early for a social call, Wilson," Michael responds, approaching the fence. The dogs maintain formation but shift their positioning slightly, a subtle tactical adjustment to accommodate the new individual while maintaining perimeter awareness. "Border Patrol's been picking up chatter," Wilson says, voice lowered. "Los Diablos cartel might be establishing new routes through this region. Thought you should know, being out here alone and all." Michael nods, appreciating the courtesy but unsurprised by the information. Figured something was brewing. Seen the same vehicle watching the property 3 days running now. Wilson's eyebrows rise. "You spot something we missed?" Michael gestures toward the distant tree line with his coffee cup. Dark SUV, heavily tinted windows, Mexican plates partially obscured with mud. Professional observation setup, not your typical border runners. The deputy reaches for his radio, but Michael places a restraining hand on his arm. "Don't spook them. Better to know where they are than chase them off and have them return more carefully." Wilson studies the older man, taking in the relaxed posture that doesn't quite match the alertness in his eyes. "Sometimes I forget who I'm talking to. 20 years on the force, wasn't it?" 23, Michael corrects. 15 with K9, 10 with SWAT, overlapping, plus the Iraq deployment training their police forces. He doesn't elaborate on the classified operations his dogs assisted with overseas. Some stories don't need telling. Ranger suddenly stiffens, his attention fixed on the eastern perimeter. Shadow and Nova immediately respond, their bodies tensing in perfect synchronization. "Perimeter check," Michael commands softly. The dogs move out, each taking a different approach vector, their movements silent and purposeful. Wilson watches with undisguised amazement as the animals execute what is clearly a practiced, tactical sweep. "Those aren't just pets, are they?" the deputy asks, watching Shadow disappear into the brush with almost supernatural stealth. Michael's expression remains neutral. "Ranger did 2 tours in Afghanistan before I adopted him. Shadow was San Diego SWAT's top entry dog. Nova could track a suspect through a hurricane and detect everything from drugs to explosives." There's no pride in his voice, just statement of fact. "Old habits die hard, for all of us." The radio on Wilson's shoulder crackles. "All units be advised. Border Patrol reporting suspicious activity Sector 7. Possible cartel spotters mapping routes." Wilson responds quickly, then turns back to Michael. "That's less than 5 miles from here. You sure you're going to be okay out here alone?" Michael watches as his dogs return from their sweep, each approaching from different directions, moving with the disciplined precision that only comes from thousands of hours of training. Ranger signals all clear with a nearly imperceptible change in posture that Michael reads as clearly as spoken words. "We'll manage," he says simply. After Wilson departs, Michael returns to the farmhouse, dogs in formation around him. The building looks like a typical southwestern ranch home, single-story adobe with a metal roof. But appearances are deceptive. The windows are reinforced with hurricane glass. The doors are solid core with steel frames disguised as wood. Hidden cameras cover every approach. Concealed weapon caches are strategically placed throughout the property. Inside, Michael checks his security monitors, noting the SUV has adjusted its position slightly. Amateurs change locations when they think they've been spotted. Professionals simply adapt. These are professionals. "They're planning something," he tells the dogs as he studies the property maps spread across his kitchen table. Ranger sits at attention by his side while Shadow and Nova maintain watch positions at different windows. Their positioning isn't random. Each dog has clear sight lines to specific approach vectors, creating interlocking fields of observation. The radio scanner on his counter picks up fragments of Border Patrol communications, increased activity, suspected drug shipments, cartel enforcers crossing into U.S. territory. Michael studies his property boundaries. 30 acres of strategically selected land. Not the best soil for farming, which is why he got it cheap, but perfect for what he really wanted. Clear lines of sight, defensible terrain, and multiple fallback positions. The previous owner thought he was crazy for installing so many outbuildings, for digging so many irrigation trenches that seemed to serve no agricultural purpose. But Michael hadn't designed the property for growing crops. He designed it for security. Every trench, every outbuilding, every seemingly random arrangement of equipment had tactical purpose. The Los Diablos cartel was about to discover they hadn't found an isolated farmer vulnerable to intimidation. They'd stumbled onto ground prepared by a man who'd spent his entire adult life training for exactly this type of confrontation. "Get some rest," Michael tells the dogs, knowing the calm routine of the farm is about to change. "I think we're going to be busy soon." As if understanding every word, the 3 German shepherds settle into alert rest positions, their eyes never ceasing their vigilant watch. These aren't pets enjoying a lazy day on a farm. They're combat veterans preparing for deployment, trained to perfection, loyal beyond measure, and about to remind a Mexican cartel why military working dogs are considered force multipliers on the battlefield. The watchers in the distant SUV have no idea what they're really looking at, but they will. Soon. Dawn breaks over Michael's farm, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple as his boots crunch through the morning frost. Ranger leads the perimeter check, moving 10 yards ahead, his methodical sweep pattern revealing years of military training. Shadow and Nova flank wider, creating a triangular security formation that maximizes their coverage area. The morning ritual hasn't changed, but today something is different. Ranger stops suddenly, his body freezing in place, ears forward, muscles tensed. Michael reads the signal instantly, his hand moving subtly to the concealed sidearm beneath his jacket. 20 yards ahead, the perimeter fence shows signs of disturbance. Michael approaches cautiously, eyes scanning for threats while the dogs automatically adjust their positions to maintain security coverage. "Contact," Michael mutters. kneeling to examine the fence. Fresh cuts in the wire, professional work with minimal distortion to the surrounding structure. Not a rushed job by border crossers, but a deliberate probe by someone with tactical training. The ground tells more of the story. Boot prints showing military-style approach patterns, careful to stay in harder ground to minimize tracks. Michael photographs the evidence with his phone, noting the timestamp. Perimeter breach, southwest sector, he says quietly. The dogs respond immediately, Shadow moving to secure the immediate area, while Nova drops her nose to the ground, picking up the intruder's scent trail. Ranger maintains overwatch, his eyes constantly scanning for movement. Michael follows Nova as she tracks the scent, noting how the intruders followed the irrigation ditch that leads toward his main house, a natural concealment route that would hide their approach from most observation points. They're good, Michael acknowledges, studying the tactical approach, but they don't understand the terrain. The irrigation ditch wasn't just for water, it was a deliberately constructed channeling feature, designed to force any approaching threats into predetermined fields of fire. Anyone using it for cover would emerge exactly where Michael wanted them. The scent trail stops 200 yards from the house. Nova signals with a subtle posture change that Michael recognizes immediately. The intruders held position here, likely observing the house. From this vantage point, they could see his evening routine, catalog his security measures, plan their next move. They're mapping approaches, Michael tells the dogs as they complete their sweep, professional reconnaissance. Back at the house, Michael downloads the footage from his hidden security cameras. Night vision images show three men, moving with military precision, testing his perimeter defenses. Their equipment is high-grade. Tactical vests, encrypted communication headsets, professional cutting tools. These aren't random border criminals looking for easy targets. His phone rings, the caller ID showing Martinez, Border Patrol. Reyes, Michael answers, eyes still on the security footage. Michael, we've got movement in your sector. Martinez's voice is tense, professional. Los Diablos Cartel is establishing a new corridor. Intelligence suggests they're mapping properties for potential crossing points. Already found their handiwork on my fence line this morning, Michael responds, watching as the camera footage shows one of the intruders carefully examining his barn door locks. Three-man team, military tactics, professional equipment. A pause on the line. You got visual confirmation? Hidden cameras caught everything. These aren't amateurs, Martinez. That matches our intel. Los Diablos has been recruiting ex-military personnel, professionalizing their operations. Word is Cesar Vega is running this corridor personally. Michael's expression hardens. Cesar Vega, former Mexican special forces who became Los Diablos' most effective enforcer. Responsible for 12 confirmed kills of rival cartel members, suspected in the deaths of 3 Border Patrol agents. They're specifically targeting isolated properties, Martinez continues. Your place would give them a perfect staging ground. Remote, good road access, limited visibility from main highways. They did their homework, Michael agrees, but they missed something important. What's that? Michael watches as Ranger alerts to something outside, Shadow and Nova instantly responding to the subtle change in their packmate's posture. Through the window, he spots a drone hovering at the edge of his property, another reconnaissance effort. They think they're dealing with a simple farmer, Michael says, not someone who spent 20 years preparing for exactly this type of threat. After hanging up, Michael checks his security feeds again. The drone is high-end, likely transmitting real-time footage to operators nearby. He lets it observe for now. Better to know what they're seeing than to reveal his awareness. An hour later, as Michael works in his barn, strategically reinforcing certain walls while appearing to conduct routine maintenance, a vehicle approaches up his long driveway. The dogs alert silently, taking predetermined positions that keep them out of sight while maintaining visual coverage. A black SUV with government plates stops in front of the house. 2 men in Department of Agriculture uniforms step out. An obvious cover story. The vehicle matches the one that's been observing his property for days. Mr. Reyes, the taller man calls out, we're conducting a survey of local farms regarding water usage. Michael steps out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, deliberately projecting the image of a simple farmer interrupted during his work. His stance is casual, but his positioning puts the barn between himself and the SUV, providing cover if needed. Don't recall scheduling any government visits, Michael responds, keeping his distance. The men exchange glances. This is just a routine survey, sir. Mind if we ask you a few questions about your property? Michael notes their subtle body language, the way they position themselves for optimal coverage, how their eyes continuously scan the surroundings, the barely noticeable bulges under their jackets indicating concealed weapons. Government agriculture officials don't move like that. Cartel scouts do. You boys aren't from agriculture, Michael says calmly, dropping the pretense. And that vehicle's been watching my property for 3 days now. The shorter man's hand drifts toward his jacket, but freezes as a low, menacing growl emanates from somewhere nearby. Shadow has emerged silently from his hiding place, teeth bared, every muscle tensed for attack. The men haven't noticed Nova circling behind them, nor Ranger's position, giving him a clear path to the driver's door of their SUV. Mr. Reyes, the taller man recovers quickly. There seems to be a misunderstanding. We represent interested parties who might want to purchase your land for a very generous price. Not interested in selling, Michael replies, his voice level despite the growing tension. I urge you to reconsider, the man continues, his tone hardening. The offer won't remain open indefinitely. Accidents happen to properties in these remote areas. Fire, vandalism. The threat hangs in the air between them. Michael says nothing, but gives a nearly imperceptible hand signal. Immediately, Shadow stops growling and sits at perfect attention, his disciplined response more unnerving than his previous aggression. The transformation from threatening animal to perfectly controlled military asset is jarring. Well-trained dog, the shorter man observes, his eyes narrowing. He was the top tactical dog in San Diego SWAT before I adopted him, Michael responds casually. Did 3 years of building clearance operations, set a department record for suspect apprehensions. He lets the information sink in. My other two have similar backgrounds. The men exchange another glance, reassessing. They see not just the dog, but Michael in a new light, noting the way he stands, how he positions himself, the controlled awareness in his eyes. We'll be in touch, Mr. Reyes, the taller man says finally, his tone more respectful than before. Consider our offer carefully. As they drive away, Michael watches through narrowed eyes. The confrontation has confirmed his suspicions. The cartel is specifically targeting his land, and they've now shifted from observation to direct intimidation. Inside the house, Michael reviews his security feeds again, studying the drone footage, analyzing the reconnaissance team's movements, cataloging every detail of the agricultural officials' visit. In his mind, he's already mapping their next moves, preparing countermeasures, setting the stage for what's coming. The cartel has made its first move. Michael Reyes and his combat-trained shepherds are ready to respond. The afternoon heat shimmers across Michael's property as a cloud of dust appears on the horizon. Through his binoculars, he counts 3 vehicles approaching, 2 black SUVs flanking a silver luxury sedan, not bothering to hide their presence this time. Michael checks his watch. Exactly 48 hours since the agricultural officials left with their thinly veiled threats. The timing suggests a planned escalation, not an impulsive response. Positions, Michael commands softly. The dogs move with silent efficiency, Ranger taking primary position by his side, Shadow disappearing to a pre-designated observation point with sightlines to the approaching vehicles. Nova slipping inside the house where she can deploy through any window or door as needed. No wasted motion, no hesitation, just perfect tactical positioning. The vehicles stop 30 yards from the house, dust settling around them as doors open. 5 men emerge, 4 obvious security personnel from the SUVs, positioning themselves professionally around the sedan. The 5th man, emerging unhurriedly from the back of the sedan, carries himself with the unmistakable confidence of authority. Expensive suit despite the desert heat, designer sunglasses, manicured hands. This is no underling. Maintain, Michael says to Ranger, who sits perfectly still at his side as they watch from the porch. To the approaching men, they might appear to be simply a man and his dog observing visitors. Only someone with tactical training would recognize Ranger's controlled awareness, the calculated position that gives him optimal launch trajectory toward any threat. Mr. Reyes, the suit-clad man calls out, stopping at a respectful distance. My name is Alejandro Salazar. I'm a business associate of the men who visited you earlier this week. His English is perfect, his tone cultured, but Michael notes the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his security team maintains professional spacing. Your business associates made threats against my property, Michael responds calmly. Not the best way to start negotiations. Salazar removes his sunglasses, revealing calculating eyes that assess everything about Michael's stance, his home's defenses, the seemingly relaxed dog at his side. An unfortunate misunderstanding. My colleagues can be overzealous. What do you want, Mr. Salazar? Michael asks directly, though he already knows the answer. I represent investors interested in acquiring properties in this region. We're prepared to offer 3 times market value for your land. Salazar gestures to one of his men, who steps forward with a document folder. Cash transaction, no questions asked about the source of funds, immediate payment. The security man approaches cautiously, eyes fixed on Ranger, who hasn't moved a muscle but whose focus is unmistakable. The man stops 10 feet away, clearly unwilling to come closer to the dog. You can place it on the ground, Michael instructs, making no move to close the distance himself. The man does so, then retreats quickly to his original position. Michael doesn't bother looking at the documents. Not interested, he says simply. Salazar's expression doesn't change, but his tone hardens slightly. Mr. Reyes, perhaps I haven't made myself clear. This offer is exceptionally generous. Many of your neighbors have already accepted similar proposals. And those who haven't, Michael asks, a calculated pause, have experienced unfortunate accidents. This is a dangerous region, border criminals, unpredictable elements. Salazar spreads his hands in a gesture of regret. It would be a shame if something were to happen to your animals. At the implied threat to his dogs, Michael's demeanor shifts subtly. Nothing dramatic, just a slight change in posture, a hardening around the eyes. Anyone with combat experience would recognize the transformation, a predator revealing itself. One of Salazar's security men notices, his hand drifting toward his concealed weapon. Instantly, Ranger's posture changes, a low growl emanating from deep in his chest. It's not the random aggression of a pet dog. It's the focused threat warning of a combat-trained K9. I wouldn't, Michael says quietly, the warning clear. Behind Salazar, unseen by the visitors, Shadow has emerged from his hiding place, silently positioning himself for optimal attack trajectory. From the house window, Nova watches intently, ready to deploy if signaled. Salazar studies Michael more carefully now, reassessing. You're not just a farmer, are you, Mr. Reyes? 23 years law enforcement, Michael responds. 15 with K9, 10 with SWAT, 3 years deployed overseas training police forces. He lets that sink in. And Ranger here did 2 combat tours in Afghanistan before I adopted him. My other 2 shepherds have similar backgrounds. Salazar's security team exchanges glances, their professional assessment changing rapidly. What they thought was a simple intimidation job has just become something far more complicated. You're making a mistake, Salazar says finally. No one refuses our organization. I just did, Michael replies evenly. One of the security men steps forward, hand now clearly reaching for his weapon. Listen, pendejo. What happens next occurs so quickly that even Salazar's trained security team can barely process it. At a slight hand signal from Michael that none of them caught, Shadow launches from his concealed position, covering 20 feet in a blur of motion. The security man finds himself on the ground, powerful jaws clamped around his wrist with precisely calculated pressure. Enough to immobilize without causing serious injury, a trained hold that police K9s perfect through thousands of practice repetitions. The other security personnel reach for weapons, freezing as Ranger rises. No longer the calm sitting dog, but a coiled spring of muscle and focus, teeth bared in silent threat. From the house window, Nova's menacing bark joins the standoff. Your man will keep his hand if he stays very still, Michael informs them calmly. Shadow has been trained to increase pressure if he struggles or if anyone else makes threatening movements. Salazar raises his hand slightly, signaling his men to stand down. Release him, he demands, though his tone lacks conviction. When you're back in your vehicles, Michael counters. A tense silence follows, broken only by the whimper of the pinned security man, whose professional composure has evaporated in the face of Shadow's controlled aggression. This isn't over, Reyes, Salazar says finally. It is for today, Michael responds, unimpressed by the threat. With a curt nod, Salazar signals his remaining men to retreat to the vehicles. Only when all doors are closed does Michael give a subtle command. Immediately, Shadow releases his hold and retreats to Michael's side, maintaining perfect tactical discipline. The security man scrambles to his feet, cradling his wrist, face flushed with pain and humiliation. He backs toward the SUV, eyes never leaving the dogs. You've made a serious mistake, Salazar calls through his lowered window as the vehicles start. Los Diablos Cartel doesn't tolerate disrespect. Michael watches them leave, his expression unchanged. Only when the vehicles disappear in the distance does he kneel to check Shadow, running expert hands over the dog's body to ensure he wasn't injured during the confrontation. Good boy, he says quietly. Perfect execution. Inside the house, Michael reviews his security camera footage of the encounter, focusing on Salazar's security team. Their movements, equipment, and reactions tell him these aren't just hired muscle. They're professionally trained, likely ex-military. The cartel is investing serious resources in this operation. His phone rings, Sheriff Wilson. Just got word of a disturbance at your place, Wilson says without preamble. You okay out there? Had some unwelcome visitors, Michael confirms. Los Diablos representatives making threats and offering bribes. A heavy sigh. They hit the Hansen place last night, broke Joe's arm, terrorized his wife and kids. Families packing up to leave now. Michael's jaw tightens. The cartel is escalating, targeting neighboring farms to isolate him. They'll be back, he says simply. I can send a deputy. No, Michael interrupts. They'd be walking into a situation they're not prepared for. I can handle myself. After hanging up, Michael studies the property maps spread across his table. The dogs position themselves around him, alert but calm, sensing the shift in their handler's mood. The cartel has made its position clear. Now they know he won't be intimidated easily. Next time, they won't come with offers. They'll come with force. Michael looks at his dogs. 3 German shepherds with combat experience that matches his own, partners he trusts with his life. The cartel thinks they're targeting an isolated ex-cop with some pets. They couldn't be more wrong. The small community church on the outskirts of Copper Valley buzzes with tense conversation. Michael stands at the back, Ranger at his side, watching as Sheriff Wilson tries to maintain order among the 30-plus gathered farmers and ranchers. The mood is grim. 3 attacks on local properties in 5 days, each more violent than the last. They came at midnight, Joe Hansen's voice breaks as he describes his family's ordeal, his arm in a cast, bruises still visible on his face. 6 men, all armed. They knew our routines, knew where the kids' bedrooms were, said next time they wouldn't just break bones. His wife sobs quietly beside him, clutching their youngest child. The Rodriguez place was hit yesterday, Wilson confirms, his uniform crisp but his eyes betraying exhaustion. Barn burned to the ground. Message painted on their house, sell or die. Michael watches the room, noting the body language of his neighbors, shoulders hunched, eyes darting, the instinctive behavior of prey animals sensing predators. Ranger remains perfectly still beside him, but Michael feels the slight tension in the dog's muscles. What's the police doing about this? Demands Frank Miller, whose dairy farm sits just 3 miles from Michael's property. We're taxpayers, we deserve protection. Wilson rubs his forehead wearily. I've got 8 deputies covering 1,200 square miles. State police can't spare additional units. Border Patrol is stretched thin with increased crossing activity. My children are afraid to sleep in their own beds, Maria Vasquez interjects, her family's farm standing for 3 generations. My husband sits up all night with a shotgun. Pastor Roberts raises his hands for quiet. Perhaps our newer neighbor has some insights. Mr. Reyes has law enforcement experience, I believe. All eyes turn to Michael, who straightens slightly but doesn't move from his position by the wall. Ranger mirrors his posture, alert but disciplined. The cartel is using standard isolation tactics, Michael explains, his voice cutting through the room without needing to be raised. They're targeting vulnerable properties first, creating an atmosphere of fear, driving wedges between neighbors, making each of you feel alone and unprotected. That's real comforting, Miller mutters sarcastically. It's not meant to be comforting, Michael responds evenly. It's meant to be accurate. They've studied your properties, your routines, your vulnerabilities. They're professional, organized, and ruthless. But they're also following a predictable playbook. So what do we do? Johansson asks, desperation in his voice. The church doors open, letting in a shaft of sunlight along with Elena Diaz, the local veterinarian. Her normally immaculate appearance is disheveled, eyes red-rimmed from crying. They came to my clinic last night, she says, her voice trembling. 4 men with guns demanding information about all of you, about your properties. Her voice breaks. They specifically wanted to know about Michael Reyes and his dogs. When I wouldn't tell them anything, they started breaking things, threatening worse. She looks directly at Michael. Then Shadow appeared out of nowhere. I don't know how he got in, how he found me, but suddenly there was this black ghost moving through my clinic. So fast, so precise. He took down 2 men before the others even knew what was happening. The room falls silent as Elena continues. Then you were there, Michael, like you knew exactly when to arrive. The way you moved, the commands you gave Shadow, it wasn't like anything I've ever seen. Those men ran. They were terrified. You sent your dog alone to protect her? Pastor Roberts asks, astonished. Shadow is trained for independent deployment, Michael explains simply. He can navigate to predetermined locations and execute specific tactical protocols without handler presence. These aren't just pets, Elena adds, moving closer to Ranger. These are highly trained military and police dogs. Michael has worked with them for years. The mood in the room shifts palpably, fear giving way to the first fragile tendrils of hope. The cartel is planning something big, Michael continues. Based on Border Patrol intelligence and my own observations, they're establishing a major new smuggling corridor through our properties. The increased aggression suggests they're operating on a tight timeline. Michael unrolls a topographical map on the table at the front of the room. These surveillance points they've established, the pattern of their property acquisitions, the specific farms they've targeted first, it all points to a coordinated effort to secure a corridor from this crossing point to the interstate junction here. My property sits directly in their intended path, Michael explains, as do the Vasquez and Miller farms. That's why they're escalating. They need this corridor operational, likely within days. Elena approaches Michael as the meeting winds down. Those men at my clinic, she says quietly, they mentioned something about a major shipment coming. Something bigger than drugs. They kept using a Spanish word, arsenal. Michael's attention sharpens. Weapons, he translates. They're moving weapons. That's what I thought, Elena confirms. They mentioned a date too, the 17th. That's this Saturday. 5 days from now, the timeline explains the cartel's increasingly aggressive tactics. As people begin to disperse, Maria Vasquez and several farmers surround Michael. We want you to teach us, Maria states simply, how to protect our homes, our families. Michael studies them, seeing not just fear but resolve in their eyes. It won't be easy, he warns. What I'm teaching isn't just about techniques. It's about mindset, the will to defend what's yours, even against overwhelming odds. We're farmers, Mr. Reyes, Miller says, his earlier skepticism replaced by determination. We understand fighting against the odds. It's what we do every day. Sheriff Wilson approaches as the others leave. Just got word from a contact in the FBI. Cesar Vega has been positively identified crossing the border 3 days ago. He's personally leading this operation. There's more, Wilson continues. Vega brought his personal security team. Former Mexican special forces, just like him. These aren't typical cartel gunmen, Michael. They're trained killers. So am I, Michael responds quietly, hand resting on Ranger's head. So are they. Moonlight bathes Michael's farm in silver as he makes final adjustments to the southern perimeter sensors. It's been 2 days since the church meeting, 48 hours of intensive preparation, turning his already fortified property into a tactical response zone designed to detect, delay, and channel any intrusion attempt. Ranger works the outer perimeter, his black and tan coat nearly invisible in the shadows, while Shadow and Nova maintain security closer to the main buildings. Michael's radio crackles softly. Position 3, all clear. Maria Vasquez's voice comes through, steady despite the tension. She's stationed in an observation post halfway down his eastern fence line, one of 6 community members who volunteered for tonight's watch rotation. Position 5, movement detected, southwest approach. Frank Miller's transmission follows immediately, his tone controlled but urgent. 2 figures, tactical movement pattern, approximately 400 yards out. Michael keys his radio once, a silent acknowledgement, then signals Ranger with a subtle hand gesture. The German Shepherd immediately shifts direction, moving silently through the underbrush toward the reported contact. Hold positions, Michael instructs over the secure channel. No engagement, observation only. He moves swiftly to his secondary command post, a reinforced shed with concealed observation ports that offers clear sight lines to the southern approach. Through his night vision scope, he confirms Miller's report. 2 figures moving with military precision along the irrigation ditch, using natural terrain features for concealment. This isn't a full assault. It's a professional reconnaissance team, probing defenses, mapping response patterns. Exactly what Michael expected after Salazar's confrontation. They're stopping at the fence line, Miller reports. Looks like they're testing for alarms. Michael allows a small smile. The obvious security measures, motion sensors, tripwires, security cameras, are meant to be discovered. The real surveillance system is far more sophisticated and currently tracking every movement the intruders make. Nova, seek, he commands softly into his headset microphone. 200 yards away, in the darkened barn, Nova rises from her position and slips through a concealed exit port, moving like a ghost through shadows, circling wide to approach the intruders from downwind. Her specialized training in scent detection will provide crucial intelligence, identifying weapons, explosives, communications equipment, without revealing her position. The intruders cut the fence with professional efficiency, then pause, scanning for response. When none comes, they advance cautiously into the property, clearly expecting security countermeasures. What they don't realize is that Michael is allowing this penetration, studying their techniques, gathering intelligence on their tactics, while leading them precisely where he wants them. They've breached the outer perimeter, Michael informs his volunteers calmly. Maintain position, no response. Elena's voice comes through next, tense but controlled from her position near the house. Why are we letting them in? Shouldn't we try to stop them? We're controlling the engagement, Michael explains quietly, learning their patterns while feeding them exactly what we want them to see. The intruders move methodically toward the main house, using irrigation ditches for cover, precisely as Michael anticipated. They stop 50 yards from the barn, deploy what appears to be advanced surveillance equipment, and begin scanning the structures. Shadow, position Alpha, Michael whispers. Somewhere in the darkness, the black German Shepherd shifts location, moving to a predetermined intercept point, still invisible, but now perfectly positioned if intervention becomes necessary. Through his thermal scope, Michael studies the intruders more closely. Their equipment is military-grade, encrypted communication headsets, tactical vests with multiple pouches, professional cutting tools. One carries what appears to be a specialized breaching kit, while the other operates the surveillance device. Their movement patterns reveal specialized training. These aren't cartel foot soldiers, but professional operators, likely part of Vega's personal security team. Nova's signal comes through his earpiece, 3 short clicks telling him she's in position and has analyzed the targets. Her training allows her to communicate specific identified threats through coded sounds. The pattern she's signaling confirms explosives, multiple weapons, and electronic warfare equipment. They're preparing to approach the house, Miller reports, tension evident despite his attempts to remain calm. Stand by, Michael responds, watching as the intruders complete their surveillance and prepare to move closer to the main structures. They've been on his property for nearly 15 minutes now. Enough time to gather the intelligence he needs while allowing them to believe their infiltration is succeeding. Time to change the equation. Execute pattern Bravo, Michael commands quietly. The response is immediate and coordinated. Security lights suddenly illuminate the entire central compound, but not in the predictable flood pattern of standard security systems. Instead, specific zones light up in a disorienting sequence designed to destroy night vision without revealing defensive positions. Simultaneously, Ranger emerges from concealment 30 yards behind the intruders, cutting off their retreat path, while Shadow appears like a phantom at their flank. The intruders react with professional speed, dropping to defensive positions, weapons ready, but their practiced responses are disrupted by the unexpected direction of the threat and the disorienting lighting pattern. Federal agents, drop your weapons! Michael's amplified voice echoes across the property, a deliberate misdirection suggesting a law enforcement operation rather than a private security response. The intruders hesitate, caught between training that tells them to retreat and the sudden appearance of Ranger blocking their planned escape route. That moment of indecision is all Michael needs. Nova, engage, he commands. From her concealed position, Nova launches forward, a blur of focused motion, targeting not the intruders themselves, but the surveillance equipment they've deployed. With surgical precision, she seizes the device and retreats before either man can react effectively. Last warning, drop your weapons or we release the dogs. Michael's command carries the unmistakable authority of law enforcement. The intruders make their decision, dropping their primary weapons but then bolting in separate directions, attempting to create confusion by splitting the response. It's a professional tactic that would work against standard security operations. It fails completely against Michael's trained dogs. Ranger, contain. Shadow, intercept, Michael commands calmly, moving from his observation post toward the action. What follows demonstrates why military working dogs are considered force multipliers on the battlefield. Ranger pursues the first intruder, not attacking blindly but herding him with calculated precision toward a predetermined containment area. The man attempts evasive maneuvers, but each escape angle is cut off by the German Shepherd's superior speed and tactical positioning. Meanwhile, Shadow intercepts the second intruder with frightening efficiency. The black German Shepherd seemingly materializes from darkness directly in the man's path, teeth bared in silent threat, forcing him to skid to a stop in reverse direction, directly into the section of the property where Michael now waits. Down, on the ground, hands behind your head. Michael's command leaves no room for interpretation. When the intruder hesitates, Shadow advances one step, his growl deepening to something primeval that triggers instinctive fear. The man drops immediately, assuming the commanded position. Within 90 seconds of Michael's initial order, both intruders are secured, contained by perfect coordination between handler and dogs, without a single shot fired or serious injury inflicted. Perimeter secure, Michael announces over the radio as Miller and Vasquez approach cautiously, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief at the efficiency of what they've just witnessed. I've never seen anything like that, Miller admits, watching as Shadow maintains perfect guard position over the captive, not touching him, but communicating unmistakable consequences should he attempt to move. Military working dogs are trained to neutralize threats with minimal force, Michael explains, securing the intruder's hands with zip ties. It's about control, not violence. Elena joins them, medical bag in hand, her veterinary training making her the closest thing to a medic their makeshift security team has. They're really Mexican special forces? She asks, examining a tattoo visible on one intruder's wrist. Former, Michael confirms, recognizing the unit insignia, now working for Vega. As Sheriff Wilson arrives to take custody of the prisoners, Michael kneels beside Ranger, carefully checking the dog for any injuries, while simultaneously rewarding him with quiet praise and controlled affection. You realize what this means, Wilson says, watching the dogs return to perfect alert posture despite the concluded action. Vega was testing your defenses before the main assault. This was professional reconnaissance. Michael nods, studying the captured surveillance equipment Nova had retrieved. They'll be back, with more men and better intelligence. And we'll be ready, Maria Vasquez states with newfound confidence, the night's events having transformed theoretical training into practical belief. Michael's expression remains focused as he scans the darkness beyond his property line. The intrusion attempt had been handled perfectly, his dogs performing exactly as trained, the community volunteers maintaining discipline throughout. But he harbors no illusions. This was merely the opening move. The cartel now knows he has dogs with specialized training. What they don't yet understand is just how sophisticated that training is, or how thoroughly Michael has prepared for what comes next. They'll learn soon enough. Dust settles over Michael's farm as he completes final preparations, the fading light casting long shadows across terrain, now meticulously prepared for the coming confrontation. 3 days have passed since the reconnaissance team's capture. 3 days of intercepted cartel communications pointing to tonight as the moment Cesar Vega will personally lead an all-out assault. In the barn-turn command center, Miller, Vasquez, and 4 other community volunteers check equipment while Elena stocks medical supplies. "Remember your positions," Michael instructs, his voice calm but authoritative as he indicates key points on the tactical map spread across the planning table. "No heroics. Your job is observation and early warning only. If the situation escalates, fall back to designated safe zones." The volunteers nod, their expressions showing nervous determination. They've spent every available hour training under Michael's guidance, learning basic tactical movement, communications protocols, and emergency response procedures. They're not soldiers, but they're no longer helpless civilians either. "What about the sheriff?" Elena asks, organizing trauma kits with practiced efficiency. "Wilson's positioned his deputies at strategic roadblocks," Michael explains. "They can't directly engage a force this size, but they can prevent reinforcements and secure escape routes if needed." A handheld radio crackles with Border Patrol chatter, confirming movement across the border 20 miles south. Vehicles and personnel consistent with cartel operations. Michael checks his watch, calculating timeframes. If the intelligence is accurate, Vega's force will reach the farm perimeter within 2 hours. "They're bringing serious hardware," Miller observes, nervously checking his shotgun for the 3rd time. "How many men are we expecting?" "Based on surveillance and intercepted communications, between 15 and 20 operators," Michael answers, unrolling a satellite image showing vehicles gathering on the Mexican side of the border yesterday. "Vega's personal security team plus additional cartel enforcers." Maria Vasquez exhales sharply. 20 against 7 of us. 7 of us plus 3 combat-trained dogs," Michael corrects, "and we're fighting from prepared positions on terrain we've spent days optimizing for defense." Outside, as twilight deepens into night, Michael conducts a final inspection with Ranger. The German Shepherd moves with heightened awareness, sensing the coming conflict through his handler's focused demeanor. Shadow and Nova have already been deployed to forward observation posts, their specialized training allowing them to maintain position without handler presence, monitoring approach routes and sending coded signals through specialized transmitters attached to their tactical vests. Michael's phone vibrates. Sheriff Wilson. "We've spotted their convoy," Wilson reports without preamble. 6 vehicles, heavily loaded, moving up Route 16 toward your position. They're not even trying to hide their approach." "They're confident," Michael assesses, scanning the horizon through night vision optics. "How far out?" 30 minutes, maybe less." Michael ends the call and returns to the command center, where his volunteers wait in tense silence. "They're coming in force, approaching from the main road," he informs them. "No attempt at concealment. Vega wants us to see them coming." "Why would they telegraph their approach?" Elena asks. "Psychological warfare," Michael explains. "They want to intimidate, to project overwhelming force." He checks his tactical display, where signal indicators show Shadow and Nova maintaining their observation positions. That confidence will work against them. He turns to the volunteers, his expression somber but resolved. "Last chance to withdraw. Once this starts, there's no turning back." No one moves. Their collective silence is answer enough. "Execute Defensive Protocol Delta," Michael commands. "All units to designated positions." The next 20 minutes pass in focused preparation. Lights are extinguished throughout the property. Communication switches to encrypted channels. Volunteers move to hardened observation posts strategically positioned around the perimeter. Elena establishes a medical station in the reinforced basement, while Michael conducts final checks of the integrated tactical system, controlling every aspect of the property's defense. The first warning comes from Nova. Three coded signals indicating multiple vehicles approaching from the south, heavily armed personnel, tactical deployment pattern. Minutes later, Shadow's transmission confirms additional forces circling to approach from the east. They're splitting their forces, Michael observes, tracking movement indicators on his tactical display. Classic pincer movement. Through his night vision scope, he watches as dark figures deploy from vehicles 200 yards beyond his property line. Their movement patterns confirm his assessment. These are trained operators executing a practiced assault formation. Two men carry what appear to be breaching charges. Others are equipped with what can only be automatic weapons, visible despite attempts at concealment. All units maintain position, Michael instructs through his headset. No engagement without direct command. The assault force advances methodically, using terrain features for cover, maintaining professional spacing. They pause at the property boundary, deploying what appears to be signal jamming equipment, a sophisticated attempt to disrupt communications and security systems. They're cutting external communications, Michael informs his team as cellular signals drop out. Switch to backup frequencies as planned. The first shots come without warning. Targeted fire taking out visible security cameras and lights. The cartel forces clearly expect this to blind the defenders, not realizing Michael's primary security system uses concealed thermal imaging and pressure sensors impervious to such attacks. They're moving on the east fence, Miller reports, voice tense but controlled. West approach also active, adds Vasquez from her position. Cutting through now. Michael watches his tactical display as multiple breach points light up simultaneously. The attack is coordinated, professional, with clear fire teams and specialized roles visible in their approach patterns. This is no random cartel violence. This is a military-style operation led by experienced tacticians. Ranger, central position, Michael commands quietly. The German shepherd moves silently to his designated location, understanding through years of training exactly what's expected. Through his command scope, Michael spots a figure directing the assault from a position of relative safety behind the main force. Even at this distance, there's no mistaking the commanding presence of Cesar Vega, the cartel lieutenant whose reputation for tactical brilliance is matched only by his brutality. Multiple breaches confirmed, comes Maria's tense report. They're inside the perimeter. Michael's expression remains calm as he keys his radio. All units hold position. Let them advance. He turns to Ranger, who waits at perfect attention. Time to show them what they're really up against. The night erupts in controlled chaos as Michael initiates the first phase of a defense plan that's about to transform overconfident attackers into prey caught in a meticulously crafted trap. The night fractures into controlled violence as cartel assault teams breach the outer perimeter at 3 separate points. Through his tactical display, Michael watches their heat signatures converge toward the main house, exactly as he anticipated. The attackers move with professional discipline, maintaining spacing and communication, completely unaware they're being channeled precisely where Michael wants them. East team approaching the barn, Miller reports, his voice a tense whisper over the secured channel. South team moving toward the house, adds Vasquez, maintaining her observation position despite the gunfire now erupting sporadically across the property. Michael's face remains impassive as he monitors the tactical situation. A round strikes the reinforced window beside him, the impact spreading a web of cracks through glass designed to resist much heavier calibers. The attackers are now deploying serious firepower, no longer concerned with stealth. They're using military-grade weapons, Elena observes from her position in the medical station, listening to the distinctive report of automatic fire. Expected, Michael responds calmly. Through his thermal scope, he identifies specific weapons. AR-15 variants, tactical shotguns, and at least 2 belt-fed machine guns providing suppressive fire. Serious hardware, confirming the operation's importance to the cartel. The assault teams converge on the primary structures, clearly executing a plan designed to overwhelm any conventional defense through coordinated firepower and multiple attack vectors. It would be devastatingly effective against standard security measures, but Michael's preparations are anything but standard. Shadow, execute pattern Sigma, he commands quietly into his throat microphone. 200 yards away, concealed in a position that gives him perfect sight lines to the approaching East team, Shadow receives the command through the specialized earpiece integrated into his tactical vest. The black German Shepherd moves like liquid darkness, circling behind the assault team that believes they're flanking the barn's vulnerable side entrance. Nova, pattern Delta on my mark, Michael continues, watching as the south team approaches the house's rear access point, clearly preparing to deploy breaching charges. The female shepherd, concealed in an observation blind with overlapping fields of fire, tenses in anticipation, her specialized training allowing her to understand complex tactical commands and execute precisely timed responses. Through his command scope, Michael spots Vega, now move forward to a position where he can directly oversee the assault's final phase. The cartel lieutenant's confidence is evident in his exposed position. He believes the overwhelming force he's deployed has already secured victory. All positions, Michael broadcasts to his volunteer team, execute Omega Protocol, fall back to secondary positions now. The community volunteers immediately abandon their observation posts, moving to hardened shelters through concealed routes designed specifically for this moment. Michael has no intention of risking civilian lives in what comes next. Ranger, Michael says simply, placing his hand briefly on the shepherd's head. No elaborate command is necessary. Years of training and combat operations have forged a partnership where complex intentions are communicated through the simplest signals. The German shepherd moves to the center of the command room, positioning himself precisely as Michael activates the property's integrated defense system. Throughout the compound, predetermined sequences initiate not random security measures, but a carefully choreographed tactical response developed through years of professional experience. The compound's remaining lights extinguish simultaneously, plunging the night into absolute darkness. Specialized directional speakers activate, broadcasting disorienting sound patterns designed to mask movement and confuse conventional communications. Targeted sprinkler systems release a fine mist in specific areas, not to extinguish fires, but to disrupt infrared detection equipment. Through it all, Michael moves with practiced efficiency, positioning himself at the nerve center of his defense. The cartel forces respond to the sudden environmental changes with professional adaptability, switching to alternative communications and thermal imaging, countermeasures Michael has anticipated and prepared for. Breaching charge at the south door, Vasquez reports from her fallback position. The explosion resonates through the compound as the south team blasts through reinforced doors, believing they have gained entry to the main house. What they have actually entered is the first layer of Michael's defensive labyrinth, a structure designed to appear vulnerable while channeling attackers into predetermined kill zones. Execute final countdown, Michael commands, activating the last phase of his defensive protocol. Across the property, Shadow and Nova receive their signals simultaneously. What happens next demonstrates why military working dogs are considered among the most effective force multipliers in modern tactical operations. Shadow strikes the East team first, materializing from darkness behind their rear security man. There is no growl, no warning, just the precisely calculated application of force to the arm holding a communications device. The operator goes down silently, disabled before he can alert his team. By the time the others realize they've lost rear security, Shadow has already disappeared, circling to his next target. Simultaneously, Nova executes her approach, not attacking directly, but systematically eliminating the South team's tactical advantages, disabling communications equipment, creating strategic distractions, forcing them to waste ammunition on phantom threats. Her movements are so precise, so calculated, that the assault team begins firing at Shadows, their professional discipline crumbling under the psychological pressure of an enemy they cannot effectively target. "What the hell is happening?" one cartel operator shouts in Spanish, his voice betraying growing panic as another team member falls, taken down by an attacker none of them can clearly identify. Through his command scope, Michael watches Vega's body language shift from confidence to concern as the assault begins to falter. The cartel lieutenant activates his radio, barking orders to redirect forces, clearly recognizing that his carefully planned operation is unraveling. That's when Michael deploys his final asset. "Ranger, execute primary mission," he commands softly. The German Shepherd moves through concealed passages built specifically for this purpose, emerging not at the perimeter where the fighting rages, but directly behind Vega's position. The cartel lieutenant, focused on the chaos engulfing his assault teams, doesn't notice the dog's approach until it's too late. Ranger strikes with surgical precision, targeting not for maximum damage but for optimal control. Vega finds himself on the ground, immobilized by 70 pounds of combat-trained Shepherd, applying precisely calculated pressure to vulnerable points, enough to completely incapacitate without causing permanent injury, a takedown technique perfected through thousands of training repetitions. Central target secured, Michael announces calmly through his command system. Shadow, Nova, containment protocol active. Across the property, the remaining assault teams suddenly find themselves caught between attacking dogs and the arrival of Sheriff Wilson's deputies, who have been waiting at predetermined positions for exactly this signal. The cartel operation, designed to overwhelm through superior force and coordination, has been systematically dismantled by 3 German Shepherds executing a precision tactical response that no conventional security system could match. As federal agents arrive to take custody of the captured cartel members, Elena approaches Michael, her expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. "How did you—" she begins, watching as Ranger maintains his perfect guard position over the still immobilized Vega. Michael kneels beside his dog, checking for injuries while simultaneously rewarding him with quiet praise. "We've been through worse," he says simply, his hand finding the familiar spot behind Ranger's ear. "Haven't we, boy?" The shepherd's alert posture never wavers, even as his eyes reflect complete trust in his handler. This isn't just a trained animal following commands. This is a combat veteran who understands exactly what he's accomplished. The night's chaos settles into the control procedure of a federal operation as Border Patrol and DEA agents secure the scene. What was supposed to be a cartel victory has instead become one of their most significant defeats. Not at the hands of rival organizations or massive federal operations, but because of one retired K9 officer and 3 dogs the cartel fatally underestimated. Morning light spills across Michael's property, illuminating the aftermath of the night's battle. Federal agents move methodically through the scene, documenting evidence, processing prisoners, and mapping the tactical engagement that has already been labeled unprecedented in preliminary reports. DEA Special Agent Torres stands beside Michael on the porch, both men watching as Cesar Vega is loaded into an armored transport vehicle, his expression a mixture of rage and disbelief. 17 cartel operators captured, Torres summarizes, consulting his tablet, including Vega himself. That's a high-value target we've been after for years. Military-grade weapons, communication equipment, detailed maps of smuggling routes across 3 states. He looks up at Michael with newfound respect. "And you took them down with 3 dogs and a handful of farmers." Michael says nothing, his attention focused on Ranger, Shadow, and Nova as they undergo thorough medical checks from Elena. The Shepherds remain alert despite their exhaustion, maintaining tactical awareness even as Elena examines them for injuries. "Just minor lacerations on Shadow's left flank," she reports, applying antiseptic to a shallow cut. "Nothing serious. These 3 performed beyond anything I thought possible." "They did what they were trained to do," Michael responds simply, but the pride in his voice is unmistakable as he kneels to check each dog personally, his hands moving with expert precision over their bodies, confirming Elena's assessment. Sheriff Wilson approaches, his uniform dusty from the night's operation, but his expression satisfied. "Just got word from the Border Patrol checkpoint. They intercepted the weapons shipment Vega was clearing the path for. Enough military hardware to supply a small army. Automatic rifles, rocket launchers, even anti-aircraft weapons." Heading to a major cartel conflict in Sonora, Torres adds, Los Diablos was planning to eliminate their competition and establish complete control of the northern smuggling routes. With Vega captured and the weapons seized, that plan has collapsed. The community volunteers gather near the barn, their expressions reflecting both exhaustion and amazement at what they've been part of. Maria Vasquez approaches Michael, her farmer's hands now stained with gunpowder residue. "You taught us we could fight back," she says simply, "not just against the cartel, but against our own fear." Frank Miller, his former skepticism completely vanished, nods in agreement. Never seen anything like what those dogs did, he admits, watching as Shadow stands perfectly at attention despite his bandaged flank. Like they understood exactly what was happening, what needed to be done. That's because they did, Michael explains, accepting a cup of coffee from Elena. Military working dogs aren't trained to blindly attack. They're trained to assess threats, make tactical decisions, and execute complex missions. He scratches Ranger behind the ears, the dog leaning slightly into his touch without breaking his alert posture. In many ways, they understand combat situations better than most humans. Pastor Roberts arrives with volunteers from the church, bringing food and supplies for both the community defenders and the federal agents working the scene. The operation has transformed from tactical engagement to community recovery, neighbors supporting each other in the aftermath of violence. What happens now? Elena asks, finishing Nova's examination and rewarding the female shepherd with a gentle stroke along her back, a touch the tactical dog accepts while maintaining her disciplined bearing. Los Diablos won't give up that easily, Torres answers soberly. They've invested too much in this corridor. They'll regroup, possibly send another team. Michael nods, having already reached the same conclusion. But next time, they'll know what they're really facing. He looks across his property, damaged but undefeated, like the community it's become part of. And so will we. Agent Torres consults his tablet again. DEA is establishing a permanent presence in the region, coordinating with Border Patrol to maintain security. But the intelligence Vega provided after his capture suggests the cartel will be focusing on internal conflicts for the immediate future. He looks directly at Michael. There's something else. The agency is interested in your training methods. The tactical integration you've achieved with these dogs exceeds anything in our current K9 programs. My dogs aren't for sale, Michael says firmly. Not asking to buy them, Torres clarifies. We're asking if you'd consider consulting, helping train our handlers to achieve this level of tactical coordination with their dogs. Before Michael can respond, his attention shifts to the driveway, where a government SUV approaches. A middle-aged woman in a crisp suit emerges, her bearing immediately identifying her as someone in authority. Director Collins, FBI Tactical Division, Torres explains quietly. She flew in from Quantico specifically for this. The director approaches Michael directly, bypassing the various agents attempting to brief her. Mr. Reyes, she says, extending her hand, I've reviewed the preliminary reports. What you accomplished here with 3 dogs against a cartel tactical team is something our analysts are calling tactically impossible. Michael accepts the handshake but offers no comment, his expression remaining neutral. I understand your reluctance, Director Collins continues, recognizing his reservations. You built a peaceful life here after your service, but the tactical integration you've achieved with these animals. She gestures toward the shepherds, who maintain perfect discipline despite the commotion around them. It could revolutionize how we deploy K9 units in high-risk operations, potentially saving both civilian and officer lives. Michael glances at his dogs, then at the community members who fought alongside him, ordinary people who discovered their own courage when faced with extraordinary threat. I won't leave the farm, he says finally. This is our home now, but if your handlers want to learn, they can come here. Director Collins nods, understanding the significance of the offer. We'll make it work. As federal operations continue around them, Michael takes a moment alone with his dogs, kneeling to their level as he's done countless times after difficult missions. No elaborate praise, no theatrical affection, just the quiet acknowledgement between warriors who understand exactly what they've accomplished together. Good job, boys, he says softly to Ranger and Shadow, then scratches under Nova's chin. Good girl. The shepherds respond with subtle shifts in posture, not the exuberant reaction of pets being praised, but the dignified acknowledgement of tactical partners who take pride in missions successfully executed. As the sun climbs higher over the Arizona landscape, Michael Reyes stands on his porch, dogs at his side, watching his property transform from battlefield back to home. The cartel made a critical mistake in targeting this particular farm, underestimating not just the tactical capabilities of 3 German shepherds, but the unbreakable bond between handler and dogs forged through years of shared combat experience. They won't make that mistake again. Neither will anyone else who hears the story of how a Mexican cartel's elite assault team was defeated by an ex-cop and his combat K9s.